Richard Murphy, Reverend Deacon Richard Murphy, Hyannis, Mass. I live right here in the village of Hyannis. I'm from Cambridge originally. I married a girl from Arlington, which is the next town to Cambridge, and as our family started to grow, I didn't want them brought up in the city, so we moved to the Cape in '67 and bought a house on C Street. So lived in that house for about 15 years and been in the house we're in now for a little over 30. So. I worked for New England Telephone, now Verizon, for 30, I think almost 35 years. Started as a young guy, really. Worked in Boston. When I moved to the Cape, actually, I was still working in Boston, and I got transferred down here because we were actually putting in the cable TV system, the first cable TV system that went in, and they were having problems with it, and I was a pretty good tech in those days, so they sent me down and to try to straighten out the problem. I never did. I failed miserably. The original antennas were down in Yarmouth. They were owned by the customer, and we provided all the cable on the poles all the way right up to the side of the house. Then the customer would take it inside the house. It was kind of a crazy system when you really think about it, but that's the way we were doing it in those days. The idea was to keep someone else off the poles, you know. So it was an interesting experience. You know, very interesting experience those years. And we owned the two-way radio, had the two-way radio and all the oddball stuff. When I worked in Boston, that's what I did. I was a radio operator in the Marine Corps. And when I got out, they were looking for radio operators because they had a ship-to-shore station, the telephone company did. So I just kind of gravitated into that type of thing. And then when data came along, I got involved right in the very early days of data. So it was really an interesting experience for me. The place I worked actually had sounders to take Morse code, still had those there, had a couple of guys that still took code, and we were the other end of the place, we were working on data, the new data stuff. It was quite a transition. It was an interesting thing. Oh yeah, great. My father's had cousins here, the McQuaids in Osterville. Bernie McQuaid used to own the Lincoln Mercury Garage at one point in time. And so we used to come down and visit when we were kids, and then my folks bought a little place over in Osterville, a little cottage, and we came down probably from the time I was 10. I spent all my summers, you know, at Crosby Boatyard, jumping off the dock and being a pain in the neck to all the people that own boats, and you know, spending my time at Dowsers Beach, swimming, looking at all the young girls, you know, as you do in those days. So. Yeah, well, it was. Like I said before, it was we owned all the cable on the poles. The telephone company owned all the cable on the poles. And it was a brand new technology to almost everyone. And a lot of the guys who were working in it, a lot of the women working in it, had no idea of the technology. You know, they had no idea of volume and how to control volume and all, just that kind of stuff. And I had been trained in that stuff, so that was a talent that I brought. And my boss actually was in Brockton, and he remembers me famously as the most expensive guy he ever had working for him. So. My favorite place is in Hyannis is to go to Hyannisport Beach, the little beach down in Hyannisport. I mean, that's in Hyannis, and my favorite place is Dowsers Beach of all the places. I mean, that's from when I was a kid, you know, spending so many hours at Dowsers with my family and all my friends, and you know, so the beach I think is my favorite place. It's the reason I like the Cape, and it's the reason one of the reasons I brought my family here to be able to enjoy get away from the city and the dangers of that. You know, I grew up in Cambridge and I didn't leave. I escaped. You know, it was a kind of a dangerous place. You know, so. Yeah, I've been to 46 of them. No, actually, as a matter of fact, we just went to the Nor'easter. It was just opened, and one of the best meals I've had for a long time. It was just great, you know, and it was good seafood, you know, clams with linguiça, so it was, you know, up my alley. So, it was, yeah, I've been to I think every restaurant. My wife likes to eat out. I do too. So we visit them. We visit most of them. We take care of the economy in that way, as you can see. No, I don't think I've encouraged them because of the job issue. But I have 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. One is in Florida. She probably will never come back from Florida. She lives in Naples. I have one that lives in Falmouth, a boy, and the other 2 live here in Hyannis. One in Centerville, one in Hyannis. My daughter is a teacher in the Yarmouth and the YD system, and my son works for himself. He repairs bikes and mopeds and all that kind of stuff. So the one who live here in Hyannis. So. When I moved to the Cape, obviously I knew a few telephone guys, a few people, and they kind of took me under their wing, but didn't know very many people. Wife was kind of shy person, not outgoing, and we got involved at St. Francis, and they had a thing called the Couples Club, which was, talk 67, 68. It was not particularly good economic times, so that really flourished. That really worked, and it gave us a whole new community of people. Joe DeLuce, Joe Reardon, a lot of other people were involved in that club, and so they kind of welcomed you in, and that kind of got us involved in that particular church. Although my wife has always been a very good Catholic. I was kind of lukewarm for many years. It was like an insurance plan for me. I went just to make sure I had a policy. But I think that that got me involved in the church, and then. I went to a thing called Cursillo. I'm not sure if you ever heard the name. It means a short course in Christianity. And I actually went because my wife was not particularly happy with me at the moment. It was one of those times when we were having difficult marital times. And she said, this would be good for you. It'd be good for the family. I said, okay, because the deal then was the husband had to go, and then the wife would go on the next retreat. And I got zapped. God found me. I didn't go to find God, really. I'm honest. I didn't go to find God, but God certainly found me on that weekend. So I got zapped. I've never been the same. I never have been the same since that retreat, And I met our deacon, Joe Stanley, who lives over in Centerville, who passed away a few years ago. I met him on that retreat. A number of people that I'm still friends with I met in that retreat. But very interesting experience. And then 9 years later, I was ordained. That seemed to be a segue into a whole new life. And every time I put the vestments on, I kind of laughed to myself, say, God has a sense of humor if he's got me in leadership, So. Primarily, I've been ordained 32 years. Of the 32, 20 of them I spent in the jail as a Catholic chaplain. Started out when it was on the hill over here in Barnstable Village, and Jack DeMello was the sheriff. I actually got conned into it. It's a funny story, but I had just got transferred to Corpus Christi in Sandwich. I was at St. Francis, originally signed there after I was ordained. Got sent to Corpus Christi. I was there just a very short period of time, and then Jack DeMello, I met him one day, and he said, would you be interested in coming into the jail as a chaplain? And my mind said to me, nah, not a good idea. But I said, sure, if you can get me a sign, knowing that there was no way he was going to get me a sign. It just wasn't going to happen. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the bishop saying, I said, darn. That isn't a word I use. Darn. I said, I got conned, And it was an amazing experience. It was a place that I was supposed to be. It was very interesting. I remember the very first guy that I talked to, they didn't like to come to the bars. I started to become a joke teller. That was the way I used to get the guys to talk, But this first guy came up to the bars, and he was talking to me. He said, hey, chaplain. He said, hey, father. He used to call me father. He said, I'm deacon, father. I said, all right. He said, I'm going to court tomorrow. He said, would you say a prayer for me? I said, sure. I said, why don't you pray? He said, I said, I don't believe in that stuff. I said, Next day I go in late in the afternoon, and here he is. He's up on the bars. I mean, he's so excited. He's hanging up on the bars, and he said, "Man, oh man, this blink stuff really works." He said the DA was telling the judge what a good guy I am. I can't believe it. He said, "The guy hates me," and this was like he was screaming this out in this like 50 guys in this unit. I said, thank you for the advertising, you know. And a lot of little silly little things like that that happened that really made it work, you know. I remember at a church service one time, a guy talking about forgiveness, you know, and you had to let go of stuff because it really hurt you. And, you know, we hear this stuff, you know, you got to forgive your neighbor, but it's really good for you, physically and psychologically and spiritually, you know. And it was, I mean, I'm in a room with 50 guys and no officer, you know. I mean, they trusted me enough to run a service without a problem. And one of the guys gets up and walks over to another guy, and I think he's going to kill him. And he said, you stabbed me. You remember who I am? You stabbed me a year ago. And I said, oh, this is bad. I was scared. It was one of the few times I was really nervous. And he says, I want to forgive you. And I said, whoa, be still my heart. I still remember that's emotional stuff, you know. Sure. I mean, to have that something, because that's countercultural. That kind of stuff does not happen in a jail. So you're talking about some power beyond anything I can understand. It was nothing I said, I'll tell you. It was just the way things work, you know. So. Well, the first thing that happened is there were a lot more of them. The numbers grew. Probably when I went there was, I think the women used to go to Framingham when Jack DeMello brought them back from Framingham. I think there were 2 or 3 women. And I think there's 30 or 40 now. Something like that. The number's fairly high. I think the guys went from 150 to, I don't know what the number is, 600 or 700 now, up in that range. So the population is certainly growing. Dysfunction. I don't think they're getting. I don't see them getting any worse. I don't. You know, I met guys that murdered people, that raped, that did all kinds of stuff. You know what I mean? And the common denominator was that it was extremely poor self-worth. You know, what you figure out, what I figured out after, you didn't have to be a mental giant to figure this stuff out. You know, I mean, most people come to jail because they committed a crime. And then you hear stories like, man, I woke up at Barnstable police station with green dye in my hands, you know, after he robbed the bank at the Rotary, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? He said he didn't even remember doing it. I mean, you know, he was so high. And, I mean, he did it. Right? He couldn't say he didn't, you know, there he was, you know. And story after story like that, you know what I mean? So you realize that it was the alcohol and drugs that were creating a real serious problem. So you say, okay, your mental says, you bring them to jail, they can't drink a drug, or most of them, you know, it's hard to get it, you know. That should solve the problem, but it doesn't. So you begin to say, okay, what's really going on? And what's really going on is poor self-worth. You know, you begin to figure out that the drugs and the alcohol are really anesthesia for pain. Unless you deal with the pain and that's those issues, it's a revolving door. I'm very proud to say this, and it was a setup for today, honest. It's funny how things work. But I was at a guy's house last night. He invited a bunch of us who worked in the jail ministry. And I want to add a little bit more because there's a lot of other people involved besides me. But him and his father invited, I think there was 15 or 20 of us there last night for a cookout at his house. So this is the guy that was a frequent flyer. He was in and out, in and out, in and out. And he's finally out. Now he's been out, I think, a couple of years and doing good. So, and I met, one summer I was walking in front of the stand at the Times a couple summers ago. Truck stops. You know the traffic in the middle of summer, right? The truck stops. You hear people beeping. This guy jumps out of his truck. He runs over, gives me a hug, and he says, "Thanks for saving my life. I just wanted to tell you I'm doing good." You know, back in his truck, and off he goes. And I'm standing there, you know, like a fool, my eyes crying. I said, "Who the heck was that?" So, yeah. Do you see them when they get out? Yeah. I meet some of them that don't want to know me.
Really?
Yeah, I've had, you know, I walked into a restaurant one night, and one of the guys was coming out, and he was pretty drunk, and I opened the door, and he was there. We like face to face. And he looked at me, and he said, "Oh," you know, expletive. I said, "Geez, thanks. It's nice to see you too." You know. So there's a retreat program that's going on this weekend. It's the 139th retreat that's been held in Barnstable. It's very similar to that Castillo program. It's a 3-day retreat. Group of people go in and share their faith with the men. It's a men's retreat this weekend. Now this figure will get argued with, I know, but I could prove it. 90% of the men and women who make those retreats and stay for the weekend, invest themselves in it. A lot of people go for a day or two and leave, you know. But the ones that go and invest themselves in it, 90% of them don't go back to jail. Now you're talking about a 40 or 50% recidivism rate. Barnstable's a good jail. You know, the recidivism rate in the state is about 65%. So Barnstable's doing a good job. Sheriff and his guys are doing a pretty good job. But in the middle of it has a failure rate of 40, 50%, return to jail rate. Introduce the power of the cross of God, and you have a 90% success rate. And the people have argued with me, and I'd say, I'll walk around the jail, let's count, you know, let's count how many people have made the retreat and how many people are back in jail. And it always works out to that 90, 92% figure. So I know that's a little advertising, but I'm telling you, you're talking about the drug problem, that's the solution. So I know I'm wearing a cross, and I'm a deacon, and I know people listening are going to say, oh man, this guy's, where I live, I watch people get healed.
Sure.
Yeah, and I have I have the stories that there are a few stories that I share, and there are many others that I can't. But one of the stories that I can share, I have the freedom to share, is a guy who lived out in the woods, right out behind what's now John Paul II High School. This was a number of years ago. It was in the old jail. And he came into jail as a really bad drunk, and he was emotionally shut down. And he punched out the biggest guy in the jail. He was only a little guy, too. I mean, you know, jeez, you don't do that, you know. And that's where he was at. He didn't care if he got hurt. It didn't matter to him. And so he was just emotionally shut down. He made one of our retreats. It absolutely had zero effect on a guy. You know, he got out and went back out into the woods. I saw him walking around Main Street. Came back to jail, made a second retreat. Absolutely nothing. You know, this time we're invested in this guy. You know, we like him. He's a likable guy, and he's going to make it. The second retreat, he just went out. When he came back the third time, you knew if he went out again, he was going to die, because he looked tough. If he weighed 100 pounds, be surprised. I mean, he really looked bad. And we were at this retreat, and it gets very open. People start to really share deep stuff. So there's a young guy talking about being molested as a child. And I'm standing next to this guy. His name is Charlie. It's not really his name. And he says to me, I can feel that kid's pain. And I looked over, he was crying. I said, man, the barrier just got broken. You know what I mean? Just got broken. I mean, that's a miracle. You know, and he, you know, after that all was said and done, one of his biggest fears is he had 2 kids that he'd just kind of thrown away because of his drug and drinking problem. He was scared to death of what they were going to say to him, 2 girls. We got them reconnected. They couldn't get here fast enough. And I haven't heard from him for 5 or 6 years, but he went down to one of the southern states to live with his kids, you know. So, I mean, that's exciting stuff. So, and the frustration, you know, the other side of the coin, is you say, look, I have something here that works, or we have, the people that go in, you know. You have something that really works. All you have to do is open your mind up to it. You have to stop listen to what everyone else is saying. It's got to open your mind up to this idea that you're loved by something you can't see, which I know sounds crazy. But people that open their mind up to that, they start to get better. And the ones that don't, you hand them something and they don't want to take it. And you say, man, you know. So that's the frustration of it, you know. We have a home here in Hyannis for women who've come out of jail, and you know, it's you know, some of them come out and they come there and they're really tuned in, and they really want to get better, and they're really open to having a relationship with God, and others just, you know. Or I wouldn't be sitting here. I found something that works, and I share it wherever I can. And that's why I agreed to do this today. You know, anywhere I can go to share what works in our society, because our people are dying, our kids are dying. And everyone's saying, well, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. The secret is to love them, man. That's the solution. You love them back to death, and then in my case, I introduce them to God. You know, I mean, that's what's going to happen this weekend. There's probably going to be 30 or 40 guys come into a retreat with, I think it's 16 people. I'm not doing it anymore. And they will come in on Friday night, and a lot of them will say, I'm not into hugging, because the team will all line up and offer them a hug, and they, oh, God, it's typical guy stuff, And by Saturday morning, they'll come into the line again, and they'll hug everyone. You know what I mean? And by Saturday afternoon, they're crying. By Saturday night, they're starting to really talk and share their stories and getting the sickness out of them. And then a lot of them go to confession. And, I can remember a great big tough guy. And he was a big guy, and he came out of confession, because we bring priests in on Saturday night to hear confession. And this guy came out and he says, "I never knew you could feel this good sober." He was high, and he had just dumped all the garbage in his life, you know what I mean? And he was in there a long time, so I don't know what he told the priest, I don't think the priest ever came back again. No, I'm kidding, he did. There's a deacon from lives up in Buzzards Bay. His name is Dan Donovan. Really good guys, and there's two other guys that work with him. So there's the legacy is going on. Bob Donahue is one of the lawyers here. You probably know the name. He's still very involved. He's been involved from the very beginning. Him and his wife Pat, they're part of the retreat this weekend. So there's a lot of people that are picking it up. So I hope it goes on. We actually exported it to Bristol County, so that program goes on up there. Tried very hard to get it into Plymouth, but didn't quite succeed at that. But it works. And it goes on other places. That retreat program goes on in other jails, so it's not just here. I think watching my children, who were both went to Barnstable High, two of them that were involved in a music program, 2 out of the 4 involved in a music program, watching them in Memorial Day parade marching with the band. So, coming out of the Marine Corps and, losing friends. I never had to shoot anyone. I was never in any tough situation, but I did have friends go over to early Vietnam and get, not make it home. So I was, that was probably a very emotional moment for me.
Really?
Yeah.
Springtime?
Lived in the South for 4 years while I was in the Marine Corps. I was married, my wife was down there with me. We almost stayed. But the seasons didn't change enough. I like the change of seasons. So I like all the seasons. The spring is my favorite, when everything's starting to get green and the flowers are starting to pop, and you get out and it's nice and warm if they've been cold all winter, so especially this winter. But so I like the spring the most. I think it's probably my favorite season, Maybe a hangover from when I was in school, because I didn't have to go to school all summer. I don't know. Richard Murphy, Hyannis is my little village.